Intros are overrated. Let's watch a time lapse. Briefly taking you guys back in time here now that you've already seen me build this. This is the collection of resources I had. This is actually almost all of my shulker boxes. I think I have one more shulker box. I'm not... Out of the way. Out of the way! I have one more shulker box somewhere that I'm not using. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I am using all of them. I only have 13 right now. I haven't really gone end busting yet because I didn't have that creeper farm yet. It's a lot of early game effort to try and put together a build that uses quite so many things. Once I have a little bit more infrastructure and some more of these farms that I need for automatically collecting blocks and resources and flying around and whatnot, it'll definitely speed up the rate at which I build things, but for now, it's such a painful grind. Whining and crying about the grinding of resources aside, this is such a fun build. I'm so proud of this. It's very unique. It's not something I've taken on before at all. And it's also extremely functional. I mean, it is a creeper farm, so you probably saw some of that. And it is a cat-based scaring the creepers to get them run off of platforms. And that is all contained inside the blimp up top. They're flushed down, and then they fall through this chute, and then they're actually killed on top of the smokestack, which would otherwise be like providing the heat to keep this thing floating in the air. I think I actually have free cam installed here. Oh crap, I don't remember how to use free cam. That's the one, okay. Oh, I don't have night vision or anything, but you can kind of... I hope you guys can see what's going on in here. So this is the blimp, and if we fly through here, you can see multiple platforms. Each of them has got the cat in the middle. I believe that's a Logical Geek Boy design, this overall thing, but we crammed a bunch of those platforms in here, and then they're flushed down into the smokestacks below. Yeah, I think it's really cool. I think it was a clever way to build a creeper farm. And the rain again. All right, while it's raining, let's go take a look at the interior. I did actually do the below deck area, this super steep staircase design, and ships usually have a really steep staircase to get into the area underneath. What's the area underneath that called? The hold? We have an engine down here, though. It looks... Well, it's very steampunky. Maybe even... No, not cyberpunk. It's steampunky, and we've got all of these like gear mechanisms for articulating the wings outside, and then a pile of coal in the back for fueling the engines. I'm very proud of the detail that went into this. There's lots of little things that I thought about while putting this together, like using podzol here, because it almost has this rainbowy color, like there's some oil or grease that's gotten on the floor and it's causing that odd reflection. And then we've got some stained areas here. We've got some cauldrons for like fire suppression. And then we've got the pile of coal, and instead of just coal blocks, I actually used blackstone, coal, and mud. It looks just fantastic to me. Now hopefully the rain has stopped. Oh, and let's turn on the shaders here. Let's flick these bad boys on and let's look at this in the sunrise. Oh yeah. Yep, I am very proud of this one. Now, it is a little bit of an odd... Well, I'm not going to call it an eyesore because it's beautiful. But it is a little bit lonely on the landscape here. There's nothing else going on. And this is a little ways, our medieval-ish area is somewhere over there. And this is going to be sort of our steampunk area, and we'll work on integrating the two together as we go along in the development of this world. But we built it right over here near the ocean and right near spawn as well. I wanted to create this sort of very dense, chaotic docks or port sort of area around here. Something that you would see in like Pirates of the Caribbean, but maybe a little bit more steampunky. And I'm very excited for what we're going to do here. I'm struggling for ideas because I've not built anything like this in this sort of style before. But it's going to be awesome, and we're going to pull it off one way or another. Moving on from this gorgeous airship, let's go talk a little bit about landscaping, because remember that giant hole I dug? I've done a bit of work. Yeah, I've definitely done a little bit of work. We've kind of done step one. We finished step one, mostly, minus that area over there. Ignore that area just around the corner here. But we've kind of finished step one for this. Step one being shaping it. Now I want to talk extensively about this right now with you guys. This is probably one of the hardest skills in Minecraft to develop, and that is terraforming in such a way that looks beautiful and at least kind of natural. And I think one of the reasons that people struggle with this so much is there are fewer objective rules that you can follow when you're building this type of thing to help you make your decisions on how the terrain's going to look. So I want to talk a little bit about two key things to sort of keep in mind. The first of those things is very simple, and that is, remember that nothing you do in Minecraft has to be permanent. You can always redo what you're building, and that's something I have to remind myself of sometimes because I'm trying to make it perfect first try, and especially when it comes to terraforming, it's fine. Say something looks a little awkward to you and you're coming by and it's a build you did like a year ago, and you look at something and you go, man, that block right there, that looks stupid, and you can mine it up and remove it. It's not, nothing's permanent. And the second thing is to focus heavily on why terraforming looks good. Not what to do, but why does it look funny? And I think this is something that is kind of hard to break down and a little bit subjective sometimes. But for me, it comes down to two things, really. One, there has to be some degree of realism to its appearance in one way or another. I mean, this could be things as simple as, for a river, when a river flows, it tends to create a steeper slope on the outside of a bend and a shallower slope on the inside of a bend. So when we fill this up with water, it sort of follows that trend on this side and on the other side. Here's one that we're actually able to get away with that is an element of very much fantasy or non-realism, and that is this whole like hanging floating dirt. There are sort of two different kind of styles of terraforming for this that I think look the best. One is more like this little bit over here, where it very effectively follows the laws of physics, where the dirt's not floating above the air. And this one, on the other hand, where it's a little bit more of a fantasy style, something that Scar would build, where the dirt's sort of floating. This is an element of fantasy or imagination that your mind is willing to accept when it comes to terraforming. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because when there are trees or roots or whatnot, and we've seen this in the real world where dirt is able to support itself above air. But in general, this is sort of unrealistic, but our mind is willing to accept. I mean, remember, everything here is a 1x1 cube. Your mind has to be willing to accept some things that aren't real. The point is, you need to identify what elements of fantasy and imagination your mind is willing to accept, and what elements are going to subconsciously make you look at it and go, that's not right. Something is off here. I'm also showing you guys this in a semi-completed state where I've just got dirt and stone. There's no texturing, there's no coloring, there's no foliage or grass or anything like that. And it's because I think this is the hardest step. This is by far the hardest step of terraforming, and that's coming up with a shape that makes sense in your brain. Now, I think I'm going to try and get in frame here. This portion, ignore the dirt pillar, that's a planned tree. We'll get to that in a second. This is the area that I've more or less completed. I've finished the shaping of it, and I'm satisfied with how it looks, and I think it looks good. Now, in the past, I've heard people sometimes describe terraforming or landscaping as just spamming blocks, and I think this is true to maybe a small extent, but less true than you might think. There are a number of flaws when it comes to the human brain trying to do terraforming. One is we tend to create patterns. And so you might have a particular shape that looks good, and then you make that shape like 6 times in a row side by side, and you develop this pattern, and nature tends not to have those kinds of patterns. When you spam blocks, you create a degree of chaos that doesn't make sense. Normally, nature is going to do things like erode an area, or the wind is going to blow dirt into a spot, Essentially, nature is going to create a degree of organic order throughout the world, and that's a hard thing to create. And part of the problem is it's hard to identify why your subconscious says something looks funny. So let's go look over at this little spot over here that is very much incomplete, and I think looks very funny at the moment. This little section of wall here, specifically around this diorite, and let's talk about why. To me, this area of the cliff looks odd because it's very chaotic. It's super random, and it's sort of that spammy block idea, and I don't think it looks good at all. We need to create a little bit more natural shape where, it's eroded in a given contour that makes sense with how the water would have flowed in. Flowed? What's the past tense of flow? I don't know. Anyway, it makes sense with how the water flowed into this space and how it would have carved out the rock. Right now, it's very chaotic, and I don't like it. Another spot that I don't think looks the best right now, and I'm still working on it, is this little bit of dirt here. And I think it falls under that whole, we tend to create patterns. I think that there's too much consistent depth of these stalactite-esque or hanging dirt formations in like a consistent distance and pattern, and so it looks a little bit abnormal. Your brain doesn't tell you, oh, it's because there's a pattern that's forming there, but you look at it and you kind of go, something's not quite right. Now let's quickly turn off shaders and continue looking at this in vanilla. That pattern starts to mess with your brain and it says, all right, well, that's not natural, something's not right. We talked a little bit about chaos and how that sets off your subconscious and tells you it doesn't look quite right. We talked about patterns and how those tell you something's unnatural or weird. And then the last one is, well, simply too many straight lines. Nature doesn't create straight lines, and that's one of the hardest parts of Minecraft, is trying to not create chaos, not create patterns, and not create a ton of straight lines. And this area over here, which is relatively untouched, is a good example of that. This is naturally generated terrain still, but you can see we have these long straight lines and a little bit of pattern forming as well. You can see this is a very consistent sort of step down, and those sort of things register in your brain as unnatural or weird as well. And trying to eliminate patterns, chaos, and straight lines all at the same time while creating something that looks good can be very difficult. That being said, I think it is worth it. When you pull it off and you end up with this type of a terrain right here, which I think looks beautiful. Rain, I just slept, no rain. Which I think looks beautiful. It's worth it. It's very difficult, and it goes back to what that very first point I made. Nothing is permanent. I'm gonna go fix something really quick. I don't have any blocks. I wanted to fill in that hole right there. That looks a little funny. But remember, nothing is permanent, and try to identify the reasons that a bit of terrain appears unnatural. And those three that I brought up are definitely good ones to focus on, especially when you're learning. I think that's quite enough monologuing about dirt and rocks for one day. Shut your mouth, Rohan. Build some freaking trees. Shaders are activated, and I think this looks pretty freaking awesome so far. I did a little bit more work. I just can't ever seem to help myself when it comes to terraforming. I did a little bit of a painting on the terrain, added some dirt blocks. I love these rooted dirt blocks. And then I mixed in some mud with them. I'm going kind of crazy with the mud. I got mud trees, mud ground, mud house. Yeah, mud, there it is. Mud house. We're just using mud everywhere because mud is awesome, and this forest is looking super sweet. I mean, it's a tiny forest. It's a lot of effort building a lot of custom trees, especially when you want every single tree to be unique. Not a single, actually I shouldn't say that. There is 2 instances of one tree, but I bet you guys will never guess which tree is here twice because I rotated it and flipped it and you're hardly gonna be able to tell. I also did a bunch of work on the beach down there. Some work on some mini cliff faces in front of the castle. And we've kind of planned where the river is going to make its way underneath the ground into the big hole in the ground. Did I say ground too many times? I made a... I don't know how to say that, but I'll say ground 30 times. Whatever. I think it's looking pretty epic. And then I did that little thing. I don't know if I ever talked about it. wanting to sort of make it so the only way to get from point A to point B is to use this future bridge that right now is just a layer of dirt. And so I put this sort of like cliff face, almost like 2 layers of rock kind of fell in on each other, and this one fell higher than the one below. That way you can't really walk across. Well, you can walk across, but the theory is that you can't? I don't know. Yeah, it made sense in my brain, even if it doesn't really make sense. But now we can fly into here, and eventually, maybe next episode, we'll get some water in there. But right now, I think I'm going to have to call it a day for building and just tour you guys around with everything we've done, because it's a lot. Shaders are just such a beautiful tool. It makes me feel like I build the prettiest things every time I look at them. You guys may have noticed something, that I used some dark rock there, and I've already switched to using lighter stone there and lighter stone in here, because I don't want this entire hole here to be that dark rock, because it was a lot of effort replacing just that small cliff with deep slate, let alone that entire freaking hole. So I'm not going to be doing that. We will be coloring it using terracotta and tuff and some other shades to give, well, some more depth, especially when you're in vanilla where you don't have the actual shadows to quite the same extent. We are going to give it plenty of depth, and I'll probably try to come up with some way to blend the dark stone formations over here with the lighter stone that I'm using over here. I just haven't figured out exactly how we're going to do that yet, but that's a future Rohan problem. For now, I just want to kind of enjoy all of this terraforming that we've done, and the biome building, or trees and forests that really sort of start to tie everything together, make it feel more complete, feel more custom, feel more building with Rohan series-ish, whatever that's supposed to mean. That means whatever I want it to mean. I've still got some dirt pillars here and there. I want more trees. I kind of want the entire world to be covered in forest, but that's a lot of effort to do. A lot of times people in creative would just make 7 or 8 different trees and then sort of copy and paste them everywhere, maybe rotating them every once in a while. But because this is survival, I may as well just build every single tree custom. I do need to stop using schematics though. I need to stop building them in advance in a creative world and just freehand them. But that's hard. I did freehand one tree. I did one just to make sure I could still do it, and it's that one. That tree was freehanded here in survival. It's probably the most plain. It has very few unique, sort of really distinguishing features, and that's probably a good thing in the long run if we want to do sort of forest, because it's a lot of unnecessary effort to make really unique looking trees, something like that. If you're going to just put 30 of them in a row. But I think for this little forest, I'm very glad I did what I did. I think it looks great. I hope you guys think it looks great. Oh, I'm just so thoroughly enjoying running around in it. And I'm not sure what else to say about this. There is one thing that I really enjoyed doing here, though. And that was trying to eliminate this. This sort of like weird brown-green sandwich that forms. Let's find a spot where I have it. Yeah, this. Oh, let's turn shaders off. This brown-green sandwich that forms where you have grass blocks. It goes brown, green, brown, green, brown, green, brown, green. That's really weird looking. So what I did was, where I wanted brown, I got brown. And where I wanted green, I put green. That way it's less of that weird sandwich effect. Sandwich effect, that's probably not the most apt description of it, but we're going with it. I think it looks a little odd, and I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of people use that Optifine tool with better grass. I want to stick with the vanilla method of using green blocks. In the past, it was green concrete or green terracotta or green concrete powder that we would use. Nowadays, I think the moss is probably the best block for this. However, I will mix in some green concrete powder from time to time. Just, it's expensive, especially since I don't have a great way of collecting tons of sand. You know what, I really ought to write scripts for all of this. It'd be a lot easier to talk and monologue about this stuff for longer and give you guys more insight about what it is that I'm doing when I'm building if I actually planned it. I mean, I plan all of the things that I say. It's just a giant script I wrote in advance. I definitely planned all of this. Ooh, one last thing, guys. One last thing. I, generally speaking, hate Minecraft flowers. I think they kind of look terrible. But when you blend them into a forest in the right way, they can work. In this instance, I chose to use dandelions all throughout the forest. I think the dandelions in the forest, I don't know, they make sense to me. They add a little bit of color, a little bit of variety. Sometimes I wish it was easier to get things like coral blocks in here. It's really quite challenging to get coral blocks placed in the forest. You know what I mean? The coral like fans, and not the blocks themselves, but the plant-looking ones. They can make really good flowers, but they require them to be placed on waterlogged blocks. So you could put like mossy cobblestone slabs down and then place those on top, but then it sort of looks like your flowers are growing out of rock. And if you place them dense enough, you can sort of obscure what's below them. But if I want to use them more sporadically, it's kind of challenging to do it that way. In any case, we will figure something out. Maybe one day Minecraft will add, or Mojang will add some more interesting flowers, some more dense, small, short flowers for us to use. But for now, we got to work with what we got. I was really thinking about how I was going to frame this house in while I was building this forest initially. And for the most part, the house is kind of totally obscured, but I wanted this window, that little bit of bamboo. Can I zoom in? That little bit of bamboo scaffolding. Why is it always raining? That little bit of bamboo scaffolding to kind of stand out, it provides a lot of contrast with the forest around it and kind of calls your attention to that building back there. And because I left it visible while you're walking on this path, to try and create a little bit of a sight line so that you can still see the house, but it's at least partially obscured, forcing you to walk over and take a look at it. Because we started over here, we ought to finish our episode over at the airship. I love this build so much. I hope you guys like it too. I had to try something totally unique, take myself a little bit out of my comfort zone. Tell me what you guys think. Let me know what your thoughts are, what your favorite parts are about this episode. If you enjoyed the monologue, or if you did not, I can monologue less and I can build more. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.